Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to be trying to create this cool kind of graffiti script logo inside of Cinema 4D, and it's actually fairly simple. The one thing I want to go over is that this kind of piggybacks off of a course that I just released through cineversity.com that you can find on my site, eyedesyn.com, Cinema 4D-Lite, and this is going to cover how to build splines, and this is going to be a really good course if you're trying to get into Cinema 4D and you may not have the full version of Cinema 4D. Maybe you just have After Effects and Creative Cloud and you want to learn Cinema 4D Lite and learn the things that it can do. Well, on this page I have a couple series. This Play one is my newest one, and it's on how to create a 2D cursive logo just using Cinema 4D Lite. And at the very end of this series, I kind of go over how you can take this a little bit further using the full version of Cinema 4D. So I'm going to skip over a few of the things like how I created the spline and things like that that you can actually pick up and watch how I created my splines. If you're not good at drawing splines in Cinema 4D, be sure to check out this course. It's going to have all that stuff. And then once you're done watching that part, come back, come see me, and watch this part of the tutorial where I take it a little bit further and make some nice, sexy 3D stuff and build upon everything that I covered in my Cinema 4D Lite course through Cineversity. So enough of me yapping, let's actually start creating this in Cinema 4D. And again, you'll see that I already have my splines created. Again, if you want to learn how I created these splines, be sure to check out that Cinema 4D Lite course on my website. I'll link to it in the comments and all that good stuff. But I got my splines already here, and we can start doing some fun stuff with it. So we want to get that kind of like graffiti-ish, blockish script cursive logo kind of thing going on. So actually the thing I did, it was fairly easy. And you're going to notice that I very finely tuned my splines here to have them in Z space there. So what I'm going to do is create a few cubes here, and we're just going to make a couple that are fairly long. We're going to fillet them, and just to give a little bit of rounding, this will be nice for any kind of like shiny textures or anything that really picks up that reflection. And then all I'm going to do is kind of just duplicate this, change the size, and maybe rotate a little bit, something like that, and then maybe even rotate this previous cube there. And then I'm just gonna start messing around here and seeing what kind of cool cube groups I can make here. So again, we want to just add some variation here, have some kind of sticking out the end here. And again, we have the fillet action going on, so we all have this really nice rounding on all of our pieces. So really I'm just kind of randomly placing all these as I think looks good, and basically that's about it. So let's go ahead, and then I'm going to take this group, right, and I'm going to just group them together under a null, so group object. And this will be, let's say, the PL block group. And then what I'm going to do is spline wrap them. And for the spline wrap to affect multiple objects, we basically just have to group these spline wraps, the spline wrap with my group null here, and make sure they're in the same level of hierarchy. So we want it like this. So we want that null with all of our cubes and our spline wrap in the same level of hierarchy, and this will be just PL group. And for the spline wrap, we're just going to go and choose that PL spline. Now what you're going to see is we get very abstract, and that actually kind of looks kind of cool, like something like modern art, something like that, something crazy. But the reason why that does that is because all of our cubes by default have very limited segments. In fact, they just have one segment in X, Y, and Z. So to get this to smooth out and conform more to our spline, we need to really up those segments there to really smooth that out. And so we already have all of our splines here with an angle limit of 0, and you can see that the importance of doing that is if you see that I jack up my angle here, it makes our geometry all chunky. So keeping it at 0, while it's going to really bring down your render times and stuff like that, you're going to ensure you get a nice smooth surface going on there. So we kind of want to play around with each of these cube objects here to try to optimize all this stuff. And you can see that we still look kind of weird, and that's because we need to start adjusting the size from our sweep object here. So you can see as I play with this spline editor, I'm adjusting the size from the start of my spline to the end of the spline, and going from like a 0 scale to 1 scale or 100% scale. And a lot of people might be wondering what the difference between size and spline size is. Well, size basically deforms the scale of your object, and if you offset it, it still maintains that size. So you can see that the scale is right in the middle there is where it starts to scale down, and that stays consistent no matter where it is along the spline. But let me just go ahead and reset to default. If I do that same thing, I'm going to hold the command key down and click and add a new point here. If I do that same thing in the spline size, what's going to happen is if I offset that, you can see that that scale deformation or that scaling down of my geometry stays consistent along that spline. So that's the big difference between the size and the spline size, where the spline size actually deforms and scales your object or your geometry down as it passes through that part of your spline and stays there no matter what, no matter where your object is along the spline. It's always going to scale it down on that same point on that spline, and the size deforms it and it actually moves along with it if you do any offsets or anything like that with your geometry. So now that that's out of the way, so that's kind of important if you're animating and you want it to animate on a certain way. But since I'm really not going to animate this, what I'm going to do, actually I animate this whole thing in my Cineversity course, so be sure to check that out on that C4D Lite page on my site. So what I'm going to do is just mess around with size here. And basically what I want to do is make this small where we're kind of going around corners, and maybe make it fat around some corners as well. So what I like to do is kind of just make everything a smaller size by adjusting the Spline Editor here. And we can actually right click on this and go all the way at the bottom. It says show in separate window, and we can have a little bit more breathing room here. Scale that up. And again, I'm going to command click and create points on my spline. There we go. And what I like to do is bring the spline point all the way to the bottom and just move this along and see exactly where I'm kind of shrinking things, so I can go precisely where I want it to be. So right off the get-go, I want to make sure, number one, I have this offset value in here. I'm just going to zero that out. Accidentally left that. And also I want to make sure that I fit the spline, and I'm just going to clamp. Actually, I think we're all good. We're just going to leave that as is, fit spline. So it's just going to extend those cubes to fit the whole entire spline. So that's perfect. That's what we want. And so we're going to make the very start small, and let's have around the curve of the letter P here, we'll kind of make it thick and put a new point here. And so actually right here is where I want it to be thick. So let me move this point right about there. And then I want this to kind of shrink right where it does this nice little curling there. I want to shrink down the geometry so you can actually make out that detail there. If I zoom in here, be a little bit better. I'm just going to hide my SplineWrap visibility by just turning off the deformer. Boop. And there we go. And let's see. So I want it to be thick right here and thick right here. and thin there. So I think I need another point from the start of the spline to here. I'd like this to be skinnier. So I'll just adjust this. Something like that. And again, you can see exactly what's going on by adjusting all this. Whoop, and I accidentally selected all the splines there. So a lot of this is just really tweaking, but this really helps by like really pinpointing, all right, that's exactly right there on the spline. I can make that fatter if I want, or do whatever the heck I want. And let's just keep moving on here. So I want this part of the L, this upper curve, to be fairly thick. So I'm going to make a new point and say, okay, this is exactly where I want it to get thick again. So just move that straight up and just turn this down right here. So at the end it gets kind of small again. And let's see, I'll just make one more point and something like that. So let's actually make this part of the letter P a bit thicker. Something like that. So again, this is really nice. Get precision in here of exactly what or how scaled down your geometry is along your spline. So we can do the same exact thing with the AY, but actually what I want to do is create a whole new block group and make this a little bit different, make it a little bit more unique in our grouping of little cube accents here. So again, turn on the fillet, and maybe make it like 5 or 4. And so there's one. Now we can rotate this a little bit, and I'm just going to duplicate that and make this one a little bit. Make this, grab this handle, make it longer. Like a bunch of like Lincoln logs or something we're bundling together. And maybe make this a little bit fatter. And maybe have this only go a part of the way. So again, most of the splines you're going to want to have small at the beginning and the end of the spline. So you kind of want the less amount of geometry towards the ends here, and that's kind of why I'm building up the center, just to give it a little bit more unique, cool kind of stuff going on in the middle of this cube group. And then I'll make one more and maybe bring this over here and scale that down like so. And you don't want to have it look like it's intersecting like this and you have this kind of odd thing going on, because that's just going to look really weird on your scripts. You want to make sure that where it's intersecting, it doesn't look really odd. So actually that kind of looks weird. You look weird, cube. We're going to move you. And maybe something a little bit more like that. And sure. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Move that down. Cool. All right, so this is our second bundle of cubes here. And again, we're going to group these together. Group. And this will be the AY group. The A group. And again, we will group these together. And this will be the PL block group. And we'll just go ahead and let's just duplicate that spline wrap and turn that on. And make sure we are using that AY spline instead. And again, we're having some jankiness because we need to really jack up those segments in X. And you can see that with just using the same SplineWrap size editor adjustment, that's actually not looking too bad on our AY group. But I want to tweak this a little bit more, so let's go ahead and show in separate window, and we can really start playing around and having fun. Actually, let's move this over here. There we go. And so the same thing with the A. I kind of want it to start small, like that. And whoops, I want to, let's see, where is this little part? I want this to be a little fatter. So I'll find where that is. So that's right about there. I'm going to just move my point all the way up. And that looks good. And then this part, I want to get small around that tight curve so we can really start to see that detail in there of that little loop. And for this part, I want to maintain small. And then right here, I want it to get fat right around that portion of the Y. So what I'll do is, again, bring this all the way down to 0 and just move this point along and say, okay, there's right where I want it to be fat. Move this point straight up, like so. And you want these points to be smooth, because you see if you don't smooth out those points, you're going to have these weird bulges and stuff like that. So that's looking a little bit smoother. And this is actually looking really good, this end part, but I think what I want to do is right on the end here, make this small and then have this fat, and then this will be small again. So right here, I want to create a point and try to pinpoint where that is. So right there, this part is going to be fat. Smooth this out, and then this will be small. Maybe that's a little bit too fat, and just make this section a little bit skinnier up here. So I think I need another point because I want to make this skinny, but also want to maintain how thick this part is up here. So I'll just make this new point and let's move this over. Oh, this is just really tweaking and seeing what looks best here. Yeah, something like that. And, you know, we have this little weird thing going on right here. And that's not due to the spline size or anything like that. We also have some intersecting going on here. So we can always go into our original spline here, the AY spline, and just adjust those points. So there's a point there. You can just move this a little bit forward. And I got another point down here, and we're going to try to fix this little piece right here where it kind of gets weird. So if we just make this a not such a tight curve, that kind of smooths that out. I can probably move this forward a little bit. And there's one more point here I can probably move out a little bit as well. Looking good. And we could probably maybe shrink the size of our geometry right here so we don't have that jumbled, junky thing going on right there. So let's go and show in separate window. And let's move this. Okay, so that's where that is. So right about there. Shrink that sucker down. Again, we need to smooth this out a little bit. And that's looking much better. And again, since we're using the Spline Wrap, we can utilize the Spline Wrap's rotation options here. So we can actually have this stuff rotate along and get some really cool stuff. So if you like, all right, maybe I like that side better down here. And again, this is the same thing where it's rotation and spline rotation. So it works the same exact way as the scale and the spline scale. So this, if you change the rotation values on here, your geometry is actually going to deform as it passes through that geometry. So I'll just show that really quick. So if we offset, you can see that that curve kind of maintains the same, and that's actually probably what you might want if you're actually going to ultimately animate all this stuff on. But right now I'm just going to stick with the rotation, just the normal rotation here. So we can kind of just adjust this to how we like, and get some more interesting angles of that cube group. And again, since this is all procedural, we can go ahead and adjust these cubes if we want. And maybe move this cube down. Oh, I'm not even selecting a cube. There we go. I got a cube. And start messing around with that. Maybe make this a little thicker. Maybe we duplicate that and move it on down the line. Something like that. Maybe shrink that. Do a little bit of something like that. So this is really cool how you can, just make additions onto this, make this a little bit more complex. This cube right here, and also the cool thing is you can say, all right, this cube right here is intersecting weird. You're weird, cube. Let's move you. And we're just going to move them back like that, and that actually looks a little bit better. So procedural, grouping these objects together, having the null of those pieces of geometry, those cubes, in the same hierarchy as the spline wrap. Everything's live, everything's editable, or uneditable. Wait, no, editable. And you can really have a lot of fun and flexibility with this route. So I can go ahead and grab this cube because it's kind of sticking out there a little bit. I can go ahead and adjust this, and again I can always go ahead and just turn off that spline wrap and see exactly what I'm doing in that undeformed state with the geometry here. So I can move this like that. See what that looks like. So that's kind of cool. And I can move this. One thing you want to keep in mind is if you don't have on the fit to spline and you extend some of this geometry like this, you're going to have to readjust some things. But since we don't have that, we have it fit spline, so we really don't have any of those kind of issues. Turn that on. So adding those more cubes actually makes this a little bit more interesting. And I think if we can actually move all these cubes and maybe, let's see here. Maybe we can center this stuff a little bit more along that spline. What? There we go. Something like that. Looking good. And this stuff right here, let's see. So I'm pinpointing this cube right here. I can either see if I can up the segments and see if that takes care of it. That doesn't really do it. I think that deformation is right there on my spline. So I need to adjust that. Make this a little smoother. There we go. That's the problem right there. So we're going to adjust that. Boom. And again, we can go in, you can see that little pinching down right there. We can just go into our spline and just give that a little bit more curve right there. Adjust this handle. So a lot of this, depending on how you build your spline, you might need to go into it and smooth out those curves even more. You can see where the curves that get too tight, you can have a lot of deformation. You also need to make sure everything's nice and smooth in all of your 3D views here, because you could have something nice and smooth here and then it looks, like this up here or something like that. All right, so I'm liking this. One more thing that you can add on to is, say you want to really get graffiti-ish with this and get like an arrow or a pyramid. We could just plop that. Again, we can turn off the spline wrap and position this at the end of this right here. So we have like a little arrow type thing. Turn that on, and let's just readjust this. And again, since we have fit spline and extend on, we might have to go in here and adjust some stuff like that. And we also need to adjust those segments, right? So we need to do something like that. And that's good. Maybe something like that. Could adjust it like this. Let's see what keep length looks like. Make this go. I like that. So that looks kind of cool, I guess. But you kind of get the point. You can add all different things onto this, really make this look pretty cool. Because, like I said, everything is procedural, so you can adjust anything you want. You can put some dang spheres in here if you want, like that. And let's see what that looks like. Oh, might want to stick that in there. So we got a stinking sphere in here doing its thing. And you could actually make, it would be cool if you just make a whole entire thing with, instead of cubes, make them with cylinders and spheres and get some really blobby looking stuff going on as well. That could be cool, right, kids? That could be really cool. And we can adjust like the scale like that. Going down the rabbit hole. So fun stuff. A lot of fun stuff. I'm just gonna stick with cubes. Sticking with the cubes. Now let's texture this bad boy. Let's make a whole new material here. Let's give it some magenta. Copy this color to the luminance. Just paste that in there. Just give it a little bit more brightness. Let's apply that to the block groups. And I forgot my little underline. My underline needs geometry. So this will be underline group. And I'm just going to make this really, really quickly. Use the Spline Wrap, the underline. And we're just going to go and reset the size. Reset the default. And I'm just going to make this so just kind of gets fatter in the middle and shrinks along the end there. Something like that. That looks nice. Cool. And then we can actually just delete, see what, remove some of these cubes in here. Like that and that. And that one. Oh, no, not that one. That one. Sure. So we'll just get rid of those. Boom. And there you go. So we got our underline all set to go. And let's go into interactive render region. And let's just go to alpha mode so we can see our viewport in the back there. And let's go back into our material. Let's add some, let's do ward. That looks, that gives it a nice hot specular highlight. Hot potato specular. And maybe give this, maybe just a little pink. Just a little pink. And let's go to reflection. Beckman's my man. We're going to add and change that to additive so it actually adds on top of our specular. And you can see that we, number one, check out that tessellation in your viewport in, I'm in R18 right now. You can actually see your cool effects now in your viewport, which is really nice. And let's add some for now. And let's do dielectric and use one of those presets. I always like using presets for this because it removes the thinking out of things. And I always like plexiglass because I like things looking kind of plasticky. And then I like to just turn down the strength just a little bit so we can get some overall reflection going through. Let's see. Turn off the specular for that. And let's add some ambient occlusion to our diffusion channel. And I'll turn on luminance and specular. And the importance of using ambient occlusion on a material versus globally in your render settings here is typically playing at a material level is faster because it's not looking at your whole entire scene. And it's a little bit faster rendered because it's just looking at an object level and what objects have that material applied to it. So Let me just lighten that up a bit. Maybe give it a little bluish or purplish. Yeah, purplish. Dark purple. So just adds a little bit of nice shading going on there. And yeah, I think just turn that down a little bit. And let's add some lights, shall we? So let's do a couple area lights in here. And we'll move this. This will kind of be an overhead light, and we'll add let's add an area shadow. Let's just turn down the accuracy here just to speed up a render. Let's go and add a fall off, inverse square, because that's the most accurate, nice looking kind of fall off. And let's go to our overhead view here and see how this is looking. Something like that. And then I'll just create, so this is the overhead. Overhead. And this will be the rim light or back rim lights, backlight. I'm talking and writing at the same time. So rim light or the backlight here. And just turn this around. So this is going to light from behind here a little bit and add some like nice backlighting effects in theory. Something like that. So let's see how that looks like. Let's give our interactive render region some time to render here. So it's looking pretty good. I like that nice little rim light, that nice light coming from the back here. We could probably, it's a little bit hot. I can adjust this, adjust the fall off here. I can also adjust the fall off on the front light here as well, because I don't think it's quite lighting this, the front as much as I'd like. Something like that. I can turn down the overhead light just a little bit, move it back, and increase the fall off so we're not blowing this out too much. Interactive render region doing its thing. Looking good, I like it. Not too hot of a spotlight or anything, or specular, anything like that. So that's looking nice. Final thing I want to do is give this a little bit more of a nice environment to bounce some reflections off of. So I'll grab my HDRI Studio from Grayscale Gorilla, turn off the floor, turn off the background. We'll keep the background on actually. And let's actually right click on that arrow, go from alpha mode so I can see that background. I'm just going to leave that default because that actually looks pretty nice. So now we can, that actually looks pretty good with the default 3 softboxes studio. Maybe crank up the brightness of the reflectiveness a little bit. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Can probably turn down the shadows just a little bit and check out the tessellation of even the shadows in there. I'm just geeking out over R18, man. A lot of fun. One of my favorite releases in a long time, especially all the MoGraph stuff. And I'll be doing tutorials on those soon, don't you worry. So yeah, it's not bad. Do say 90. That looks good. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's render out this still. Current frame. That's good. Render that puppy out. And turn on the camera here. Hey, I'm back. So that was how we created this cool little graffiti cursive script using Cinema 4D. And again, if you want to catch how I created a more 2D cell style cursive logo, I go over how I animate, all that good stuff. I go even further in how I build the splines, how I adjusted the sweep objects to get that nice variation in thickness and all that good stuff. So definitely check that out. C4D light compatible. on eyedesyn.com/cinema4d-light. And there is our final render. Looks kind of like our original. But again, everything's going to look different depending on how big your cubes are and all that good stuff. And again, this was just so easy. We just used a group of cubes and just wrapped them around a spline wrap and created something pretty cool, pretty fun, pretty abstract. And, you know, sometimes it's just the easiest things make some of the coolest stuff. So go ahead, go try this technique. Use some spheres, use a figure object. Go nuts with one of those figure object guys right there. Go use that guy. Move him along. But yeah, have some fun with this, and I would love to see what you guys come up with. Post them in the comments, tweet them at me, Instagram them, MySpace it, all that good stuff. I want to see what you guys are making. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.